ahead and glue our plexiglass in place, our Lexan. So I'll get you close up of this, but what you might notice is that the holes don't line up perfectly because we drilled it on this side and then moved the plexiglass around to the back. In a perfect world, we would have attached the plexiglass to the back and drilled straight through, and then everything would line up the way it's supposed to. Didn't do that. So that just means that we need to re-drill some of these holes to space them out a little bit. So I chose 3 points where the holes that kind of maximize the number of holes that were lined up. So I've got 2 corners, basically 3 corners typed in here to hold this nice and straight while I do the re-drill. So that's part 1 of this. And then we're going to take this back off, put silicone on it, and then attach it all together. But first off, we need to make sure the holes line up correctly. So we're just going to take a 1/4 inch bit on our drill. Like I said, I've got these 3 points chosen so that the most holes are lined up as possible. And I'm just going to start on one end. Basically just bore these holes out a little bit. So that when I go to put the bolts in, they pass through easily to the other side. So a little bit on the bolts. These are stainless steel. If you're going to run a saltwater system, you absolutely want stainless steel bolts. Make sure they're stainless, not zinc coated. A zinc coated or galvanized bolt is essentially dipped in hot lead. That will eventually leach out of that bolt, and you don't want heavy metals running around your aquaponics system. Stainless is inert, so you don't have to worry about that. There's 2 grades of stainless, 304 and 316. 316 is better. They don't always list what grade stainless you're working with. So if you can get 316, great. These came from Lowe's. I'm sure they'll be fine. The other thing to make sure you do is make sure you don't mix metals. So if you're going to get stainless bolts, get stainless nuts as well. Very important because stainless steel does not react well to other metals, and that will cause it to rust. If it's stainless on stainless with no other metals involved, then it should do really well. And next up, we're going to put down our silicone to glue the window in place. So this came from Petco. It's 3 ounces. I wouldn't recommend getting more than you need. Silicone has a habit of drying in the tube when it's not used. So like I said, this is a 3-ounce tube. I briefly considered using epoxy, hardened epoxy to do this, which would make this basically a permanent waterproof bond. I was worried about the interaction of the chemicals in the epoxy and the fish. In theory, when epoxy cures completely, it's inert, in theory. But there are such things as potable and non-potable epoxies. So I didn't want to go there, so I just went with the silicone. All right, so usually there's a little pointy part in the cap here. You can use that to bust the seal on the top, like so. All right, and then the next step is to cut this off. So this is the little Spencing cap. You can cut that off at an angle, or you can just use this straight. If you're going to use it straight, because you lose a lot of epoxy in this little thing, or silicone. If you can use it straight, you should have gloves. Got my gloves, my silicone, and a tool to help me spread it. So I'm basically just going to go around this layer here. So make sure I essentially get silicone on the holes, slightly outside, and then I'm going to spread that out so it's kind of a thin layer around the outer edge here. So the nice thing about silicone is you get a pretty long work time with it. It's not infinite. You don't have to really rush like you do with some epoxies. Again, the silicone's working as a thread lock. It's not even hot. It'll make the process. It's not bad. See, too many. So that is plus. And I'm just going to go around. Turn these basically finger tight. Well, a little more than finger tight. And turn until this thing spins in my palm of my hand. Now that we have our window in, it's time to think about drainage from the black tub. So this is our bulkhead. It's an 1.5-inch bulkhead. You don't have to go 1.5 inches, you can go 1 inch. I'm going to use the 1.5 inches. I find that the more water throughput you can put through the tank, the better off you are, generally speaking. All right, so we have an interesting dilemma here. So this is our shelf. Imagine this was flipped the other way. You have the tank sitting on the shelf, and you can drain water out of the tank. The logical place to put that is right in the middle. Problem is, if we put this right in the middle, then we've got to cut this shelf. Not only are we going to have to cut a hole in the shelf, we're going to have to cut through this main spar. And that's what's providing a lot of the strength that's going to hold this up. Remember, this is the heaviest component of your whole system. So, not the best idea. You can't put it near the front. I mean, we could put it on the shelf like this, put the bulkhead there, but then your window is entirely occupied by a standpipe that's holding the water level in your tank. That's not very fun. So the logical thing to do here is to put it in the rear, kind of center rear of the tank. Because the tank is wider than the shelf, we get some space in the back that we can put this on. It'll create some interesting problems when we actually set it up, trying to get it close to the wall. So we want the front of the tank flush with the front of the shelf. Something like that. Then we have just enough space to put this bulkhead in. We might even have to do a little trim here off the edge, and possibly a trim on this side as well, but basically this is what we're shooting for. And it turns out that this lines up almost perfectly with the crossing point of these two circles in the middle. So we can really use that crossing point as the center of the hole we're going to put in for this bulkhead. If I drill this hole too small, then it's going to be hard to re-drill it so it's the right size. So that's the fit with a 2 1/4, which is very close. It's the kind of thing you can put in, then maybe roll around a little bit to widen it up so you can fit the bulkhead in. This drops over it. I'm going to have plenty of space for that O-ring with this bit, but it will come out quite a bit wider than the actual barrel of that bulkhead. I'm going to use the 2.5-inch hole saw to drill a hole, fit that into. I'm going to use 2 1/4-inch in the bulkhead. I'm going to push the bulkhead in as far as I think I can to avoid the wall here, so I don't have to trim anything off of it. I'm going to drop a 2 1/4-inch right in the middle, like so. I'm going to try and get it as centered as I can. Then I'm going to use this. Okay, so I've got a little mark on there now. Get my safety glasses and use this bit to do my pilot hole. Great. Alright, plenty of space. So these ribs may end up being problematic. I may have to come in here with like a Dremel tool, cut these back a little bit so I can fit the washer for the whole bulkhead flush in. Okay, so I've got a Sharpie. I'm going to mark off the points we need to shave this back to. There, there, there. So I can do that shave job with a Dremel tool. Get in here with one of the blades and just cut back these reinforcements until I get to those edges, and then this bulkhead will seat flush against the bottom of the tank. Got a thread tape on, so now we're going to tighten this. Basically, I'm going to have to reach up in here from the bottom, and then we're just going to screw this nut down. So you can tell if you have a bad bulkhead if it catches up on the threads as you're doing this. This bulkhead.
Top turn.
Okay, so this is pretty snug. Try and get it centered to my best guess. And then you don't have to refund these things. In fact, you shouldn't, because if you over-tighten them, you over-compress the O-ring and it leaks. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to give this a nice good-sized wrench, a little twist. Maybe a quarter turn to a half turn. Just make sure it's good and snug. Extra thread tape, you can just kind of tuck in there. See how that thread tape kind of got beat up, but that should be nice and sealed. All right, so now we got a tank with bulkhead drain, a window, and we're going to get around soon to fitting the drain pipe.